you know,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
All right.
This will be the official tape. Stop the insert.
Ah,
Okay, so first item on the agenda, it's August 20th, 2019, 6:04 PM, calling the meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. Jordan Tate,
Tis Crowley.
Sam Boss.
Jane Cosplay.
Peter Craig.
special guest. Brianna is dealing with a family situation, so she'll be absent, and Tony is not here tonight either. So we can move on to review and approve the July minutes.
I move that we table those minutes. I had several changes, which I didn't want to take up the time to while we were here, but I ran out of time from typing them. So I would move the table them for next meeting,
Table them to next meeting.
but that needs a second.
I can go ahead and second that. All in favor of tabling the July meeting meeting minutes to the September meeting?
I'm fine with that.
If we could, and it would be a request of the city, because I support their consistency under minutes, they only put approved minutes for any agency, board, or committee. But what might be helpful on ours, and probably others, it could say that draft minutes are available in agenda packets. So if somebody really wants to know, we're holding something up, they can go to, I know that's true for the other committees that I've served on, and it just might be helpful to, if somebody was looking for information. Particularly if a agency, board, or committee doesn't meet in a single month, that would go 2 months' worth of possible missing minutes. So that would be a suggestion, since we have our city manager here.
I can review to see how that's been done with our minutes thus far.
I think they followed the policy, they only post approved minutes.
Right, but when I send out the agenda packet, I
Oh.
usually, it's not included within the PDF, but I send it in the same email with our draft minutes. But I don't know if they post them because it's a separate document, so I can confirm. I'll take a look at the
I
city
never look
website.
at the agenda packet in detail, I just see that they're there.
Welcome, Michelle. Do you want to say your name for roll call sake?
Michelle Malrania,
And you've been sworn in?
did you go to the city clerk's office?
No.
Okay.
So you can participate in the vote.
I went right to work this morning and picked up a horse just now and just
Oh, wow.
finished with that one, so
Busy day.
yeah. I can get there Friday.
Okay, yep, just before our next meeting would be great. Thank you. Okay. Agenda. So moving forward, public comment and guest visitors, which we do have. So if you have anything of particular importance that you would like to address, or if you're just here for the ride.
Where do I start? Yeah. I looked at your agenda earlier. There were a couple of things that I think you want me to talk about. Phil Kroll, who's the assistant city manager, and I met with Jordan and Rihanna to talk about some issues at the Conservation Commission. I didn't leave anybody out, did I, Jordan? It was just the four of us, right?
There was one more person there, Dan Goya.
Oh, that's right, Dan Goyer, the Public Works Director of the city, thank you. And Jordan, maybe you can talk about why you were meeting with us. I was happy to meet with you. Dan, Phil, and I were all happy to do that, to bring some clarification to some issues. Speak about two items, right?
Yep.
One having to do with the taping of the meetings and location of the meetings, the other one having to do with the survey by Bates College.
Right. So at the point at which we met, I believe it was a week after our July Conservation Commission meeting, and we wanted to address two issues in particular. The taping, because we had in May been moved to the council chambers where our meetings were recorded on the TV system and then posted to YouTube. And then in the beginning of July, we got a notification that we were being moved back to the community room, and it seemed as though audio recording was available but not video. So we ended up having a meeting to clarify, and basically we agreed that we would maintain what was previously being done, because there are people who do watch our videos, whether they be members who weren't available at the previous meetings or members of the public. So this is our setup moving forward. If we do have any kind of specialty meetings or guest presentations, speaker series, anything like that, we can request to use council chambers in advance, which is kind of how we've operated before, and it's been fine. So if we anticipate, maybe there's a meeting where we anticipate, expect to have a lot of members of the public, that would be a perfect situation to do that. So that was the first topic, and then the second topic was about the Bates survey. So the standing of the Bates survey at the time is that the mayor had released a statement, recommending or requesting that no staff groups, take into account the survey results. It was clear that that was his opinion and not reflective of other city staff, elected officials. And that's one thing that was echoed in this meeting, and it was brought up that, it would be a shame to have the results of this kind of just lost, and it was recommended that potentially we have a joint meeting with the planning board where these results would be presented to us, and it would be up to us how we decide to incorporate those results into our own fact-finding and discussion about the agricultural resource protection zone moving forward. I'm not sure if that meeting's been set yet. The results are anticipated to be kind of finalized and processed this fall, so that joint meeting would be sometime maybe September or October, potentially November. So that is up for discussion for this group. I said we would discuss it at our August meeting. So the last thing that was discussed at this meeting with Peter, Phil, Dan, Rihanna, and myself was the Littlefield Dam. I'd really like to get the gears turning on that again. Starting, some kind of stakeholder workshop. So for those of you who aren't aware, 2017 we were involved in discussions on the Lower Barkerfield Dam relicensing, or Barker Mills Dam relicensing. We had coordinated with Bjorn Lake of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He brought up a grant opportunity to talk about Littlefield Dam. It's in between Upper Barker Mills and Hackett Mills Dam. It's like adjacent to the Martingale property. It's not regulated, it's a decommissioned dam, it's existent, but it's still a barrier to fish passage, it's a hazard to public safety. So we had discussed opportunities to pursue federal grants to get that removed. We went before City Council and got their approval to submit a pre-proposal in 2018. That was the time of the government shutdown. That funding for that particular grant was reallocated, so we never heard back on our pre-proposal. We were going to try for it again this like early spring, but we ended up not going for it because there was some uneasiness about, now this was a different grant, there was still this question of matched funding that we would have to do. So we want to try and be proactive in developing a stakeholder network. Josie, who had come to one of our meetings, I think in April, from the NRCS, I know that she's done some work on trying to get this dam removed. We have made some decent progress in previous attempts, so just trying to be proactive and get funding matches, lined up ahead of time. Maybe you'll get other grant opportunities that aren't federal grants. That's something that we wanted to move forward with. So that was the last thing discussed. I've done a lot of talking. Are there any questions?
Just as a very quick aside, I just wanted to point out I have Rihanna on speakerphone on my phone here on the table, so just speak up.
I'm sorry, I'm not here.
We appreciate any time you give us, and you'll get to watch our recording and tell us how we can improve after. Peter, do you have some things before the rest of us? Because I know my first thing on my list is to, first of all, thank the city manager.
Got all my input as far as the subcommittees, and we'll just go through the agenda, and you just keep going, and I'll get the fly on the wall.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
So Peter, I want to thank you for the public position that was put in the paper, and first of all, I wholly support it, and I think it needs to be said. Well, I think it's very important that important information is accessible to all people, particularly if it relates to the city of Auburn or impacts the city of Auburn. And I don't care whether it's Bates or the state of Maine or some African country that wants to invade Auburn. I'd like to know. I think that it should include the source of where the data or information or report comes from, but then leave it up to the reviewer to determine its value, its credibility, and its weight. So whatever you need from I as an individual, and I'd encourage us as a whole, as a body of a whole, to say we support the position of open access to information. And on my agenda is to create a policy that starts with us, but hopefully might get adopted by others. But I want to thank you and ask you what else we can do.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Tiz. And first of all, thank you, Jordan, for summarizing that meeting very well. I couldn't have said it better myself. On the issue of the survey, I had made a statement to Andrew Rice that I was going to talk about it last night under my city manager comments. And then after that, talking to city councilors and the mayor, I felt it probably was not the right thing to bring it up when he wasn't present. So I told him before he left to go away on vacation that my plan was to bring it up when he returned. So the next city council meeting, I plan to bring up the issue. I don't know what his thoughts are going to be at that point, whether he has any different thoughts than he had. Maybe being away, he will think about it differently, or may not. I do think Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the City Council should consider the results. Obviously, each of you will decide when you want to do that. I'll be interested in reading your results. I think the relationship with Bates College is an important one. And I was telling Morris earlier, I've learned some valuable lessons from this process we went through. And I think that it would be beneficial for the city and Bates College to have a memorandum of understanding going forward in the future, not to tie your hands in terms of what is being done at Bates College, Sam, but to make it so that the communication is clear between the two entities when we are doing the project coordination like the survey. And there are lots of examples of where Bates College has provided assistance to the City of Auburn as well as the City of Lewiston over the years. I think it's an important relationship.
I would certainly echo, wearing my Bates hat and my, Auburn resident hat here. I would certainly echo, I think there is value in having some kind of formal agreement in place to navigate these things, because there are politically sensitive topics that come up anytime you're dealing with land use and environmental issues. So I think it's worth, making sure that we have all our ducks in a row on that, and I think that will help us going forward. So I certainly appreciate that and would echo that.
I assume that's going to create a
Thank you, Sam and Jeffrey. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I've talked to Darby Gray about this a couple of times, and she agrees. So we just need to work out what that MOU will be. I would imagine Bates College has an MOU like that with other entities, maybe not.
Probably, it's very different. Those are complex legal documents, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you know well,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of haggling back and forth, and attorneys
Yeah.
have to get paid, and so I don't know what goes into all of that,
Yeah.
but certainly worth figuring out.
Yeah.
And
We'll try to make it not too complicated.
yeah, I think the simpler the better. I think
Yeah.
most of this stuff can be addressed fairly in a straightforward way. So.
Yeah.
And this, I assume, will create a procedure that we will have with other entities that provide us with either resources or shared information or joint projects, because
Yeah.
I can speak from my experience in our relationships with Bates, have all started by the city inviting them in. And I would imagine that we probably have similar relationships with many other people. So it's probably a good, safe procedure to establish, using this as the exercise for the first, and then reviewing what else we have.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we actually have MOUs with other entities, different things that we're doing, so it makes sense.
Will there be an opportunity for the council, the planning board, and the CC to provide any suggestions, if anything, if you have a tentative draft?
Sure.
Because and one of the suggestion I would make is that there really is quite a broad difference between the gathering of data, the study and research.
Yeah.
And we may need to consider each one with a little bit, because I think the gathering of data needs to have a lot more flexibility, because the world is going to be changing so fast around us.
Right.
That basically there may be some research information just come to the surface, but bingo, it's going to affect something that's in progress.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there has to be some way that the process doesn't slow down or complicate the end result.
I think,
Right.
yeah, I think that's a very good point. And as all of the discussion of the survey was unfolding, and as we were thinking about the timeline, and I was understanding the process that has to be in place in order to get research approved. You know, you have to get a vote of the Conservation Commission, then a vote of the Planning Board, and if the sequence doesn't work out right, that could take 3 months. You know, and then you know, your students can't do the work.
So that's of course you're talking about projects that belong to the city of Auburn or that we're part of.
Right.
There's nothing,
That's right.
again, speaking with
Yeah.
my residents' voice consistently and
Yeah.
loudly, there is nothing that prevents any Auburn resident, or actually anybody, from searching data, researching or that. The city does not have 100% control
Right.
over our lives, so
Yeah.
some of that, I think Peter's
And we
talking about,
shouldn't.
and you should not, absolutely.
And certainly I agree with that, but just to Morris's point specifically, as the city decides it wants to gather data and do
Right.
research, whatever form that might take, whether it's working with an outside entity or working with city staff, it would be nice if that process can be expedited to the greatest extent possible, because, you know, anytime you have to go through multiple boards and so on, I think that just makes it that much
You know,
more
I think
complicated.
a good example, really is Littlefield Dam situation, because basically Jordan became aware of that in some other contacts in between meetings.
Right.
It was a case that the federal timeline, if I recall correctly, was you know, approaching, and basically she had to do something, either the opportunity was going to be lost,
Yeah.
or she had to go ahead, and basically the needs, there are going to be times, you know, make certain it's not abused, but at the same time there needs to be enough flexibility so that if that time window opens, then we can somehow take advantage of it, because Auburn's going to be a loser if we don't. And I guess that's what I'm, you know, how you frame that, I'm not sure, see, but I think there is a difference between data and a more formal study or research.
I think, going back to the survey itself, I still think that there's a significant piece that's not quite understood about how it all came about. I think it's really important for you and for the mayor to know as well. And it really sort of all generated at the level of residents,
Absolutely.
of individual residents who, in the process of all of this ag zoning issue, came together and said, you know, how can we involve more people? You've heard me say at meetings, you know, can the city please continue to send out mailings to every single ag zone owner, property owner, to inform them about this, because they aren't aware. And as a result of that, and having those conversations amongst ourselves, one of the things that we talked about doing was actually a door knocking campaign, and just go visit our neighbors and say, hey, you know, are you aware this is happening? I don't really care what your views are on it, but please come to the meetings so that everyone is informed. When we as a small group started talking about that, we realized how not feasible it was to do a door knocking campaign. We discussed doing mailings. I offered, I know other people also offered to actually pay postage to send mailings out to people. Again, just to inform them. I know that other people, as well as myself, went to city staff and said, hey, you know, can you send out more mailings, or what can we do about it? They said, well, we don't have the staff to do that, we don't have the resources to do that, but you can feel free to do that, which we did. And that's kind of how that survey came about.
Mhm.
And I think that too much focus is being placed on the fact, or on the misunderstanding that Bates developed the survey. And they really didn't, they just, Francis happened to be there and say, hey, you know, we've still got resources to do this, how can we help you with this? And because we knew we couldn't do a door knocking campaign, you know, we jumped at that. And the we being a very small group of folks who have consistently stayed involved with this and have had concerns and really wanted to involve a much larger number of residents in the ag-RP zone. And it really was a citizen initiative. And so I'm feeling kind of bad about the fact that Francis took a big part of the heat, you took a big part of the heat on this. And that's not where it started, really. It really was initiated with us, with that small group of individual residents. And just like you said, anybody could go.
Right, and I was gonna say, I just wanted to also know, because I've heard the complaint that was only addressed to the ag owners, property owners, which, again, the city has numerous rules like that. You know, people who live within 500 feet get special treatment in certain conditions than the person who lives at 501 feet. So I know I have been welcome. I believe I've attended some of those. They're not identified as formally as
Yeah.
that. They're really neighbors coming together, but just because it was talking about the egg zone and property use and that, they were not exclusive, because I know I attended some of those for good information.
Yeah, I've spent some time talking with Francis, so I wanted to understand where he was coming from, what his perspective was. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of how things happened
Yeah.
and evolved. And again, I feel like the results should be shared.
I appreciated that, and before we leave the topic, we may come back, but since this is a
Yeah,
public
yeah.
meeting, I also think it'll be a good time to review the authorities of various positions. Having served as a city councilor, I know that you report to the city council.
Correct. Yep.
In that the mayor has limited authority, and maybe that needs to be a more public education, because the perception in newsprint and others is that either there's authority there that isn't.
Yeah.
I know there isn't,
Yeah.
because I've read it, and what the roles are. And
Right.
I think, again, if we go back and do what I call a post-op visit, you
Yeah.
identify those things to prevent in the future, as well as to, is this our best outcome, and what else, what did we learn?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying.
You're in a delicate
My
spot.
view-
I said it so that your bosses can hear it.
I know, and I know who I work for
Yeah.
and report to, because I work with the mayor on a regular basis. I have to do that.
As you do
For
with
the-
every
For
citizen.
the city to run effectively. And yes, every citizen, but because of the position the mayor's in, I need to meet with them on a regular basis. I will say, you know, I think in this particular case, when Andrew Rice did the first story with the mayor, he didn't call me, which was unusual for me, because we have, I think, a pretty good relationship. He feels comfortable calling me about stories, whether it's a negative story on the city or a positive story on the city, but he didn't call me. So I took the initiative of calling him, because I understood that when the mayor made the statement that he did, which I did not recommend, that some people would interpret that as being a statement on behalf of the city council, on behalf of me, the city manager's office, and so forth, because they don't understand what the limitations are. And I wanted to make sure that Andrew did recognize that, so.
And I do appreciate that. I don't want to harp on the matter too much, but, you know, things that we had talked about in our previous meeting on how to prevent this, or, you know, there was confusion about who was representing who as the Conservation Commission versus an individual, so we discussed
Yeah.
reviewing our own policies and procedures internally so that we're clear on when we're representing versus when we're an individual. We also discussed you know, some kind of orientation. That was also in the email from Phil on July 3rd that, you know, outlined that we would be, you know, only planning board, city council and school board being there. It was also discussed about potential orientations, because I never received an orientation, I don't think anyone did. I'm obviously fairly young, so I don't know everything about the city charter. So for me, it was a little bit confusing too when that statement came out. So, potentially having an orientation and reviewing our own policies and procedures were a couple of things that we had discussed internally about how to prevent this from happening in the future. Because, we just want to make sure that whatever information is collected is usable, and we don't want to have this kind of whirlwind again. So those are things internally that we just discussed about doing.
And we will do that with the boards. Phil actually
I'm
did.
getting off and out, but, I really appreciate what you're saying. And we really need to take a stand on this. The survey really needs to be public. I really appreciate what you've done in our meetings. What we're reading in paper for. We really need to get this survey out there so that people can get their say in this. I think the most important thing is, regardless who's doing what and what committee is putting their 2 cents in, that King William, as holding a zone, really needs to be said. And we've talked about this many moons. Their say, their plans, their say in this is highly important. And so many that, out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will do an orientation with the committees.
Peter, I really appreciate everything you've done for the city of Auburn, everything. You're very objective, you're very, this survey is vitally important for Auburn.
Are you getting our audio okay here, Brianna?
No, I'm getting
Okay.
cut in and out. I heard what you said, but that's okay.
Okay, all right. Yeah, go ahead, Peter. Peter's trying to jump in, Brianna. Peter's trying to jump in.
John, just to respond to what you were saying, Jordan, we will do an orientation with the committees and the boards. We recognize that that's something we need to do to improve the situation. Phil met with the staff to the different boards and committees, and I think had a very good meeting with them the other day, from what I understand. So we're taking these steps to try and improve that. We have over 30 committees and boards, and we have failed miserably at reducing that number. And I'm not sure that we can, frankly. I mean, I've looked at the list and I'm pretty familiar with what all the committees and boards are doing. And I'm not sure how we reduce that number at this point. Every time we talk about that, it seems like we're adding more committees, not taking them away. So anyway, we will do an orientation.
Thank you, and I just want to echo that, you've been very helpful in this process, very objective and proactive even with suggesting the meeting that we had. So we really appreciate everything that you've done, and, just helping kind of be very unbiased. It's very appreciated. So, thank you for everything you've done.
And I'm aware of Phil Crowell's work with the places. He was kind enough to reach out to me because I'd had some comments, and the little I know of the results, I definitely felt heard. And I think there's a good basis if they go back to the ABCs. I think the difficulty of the 31 is I've never seen the problem with multiples other than limited city resources, which
Yes.
any business has. So for me, whatever they do only relates to City of Auburn agencies, boards, and committees, and we need to remember that.
Yeah.
And so when we look at our 30 or 40 or whatever number we want to count, because ad hocs come in and that, we really, again, we, the City of Auburn, only have control over those that belong to us. And maybe we need to identify those
Right.
two. One is, these are our people we'd like to
Right.
work with,
Yeah.
and how much resources can we allocate to this area, but to focus on only those that belong to us. And sort of mind your own business until we have our ships in order.
Mhm.
And when we do the training, to reach out and offer that training to others, hopefully they'll, let them pay the cost, their core cost. But I'm really encouraged by the thoughts of an annual regular training, not only for the agency boards and committees that belong to the city of Auburn, but those outside. And I think there's a strong need.
I agree.
So is that everything you'd like to discuss? Do you have any other?
Probably said too much already.
Well, we appreciate your attendance.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
I will excuse myself so you can go back to your regular business.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Good night.
You're welcome.
We appreciate you
Thank you,
coming.
Peter.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
Okay. So, part of that was, that was public comment guest visitors, but also a lot of what we talked about was also in the work completed with that meeting. So moving on into the rest of the work completed, we have 2 new members. Yay, which I believe puts us at a full board, which is, I think,
Yeah.
the first time since the first 7 of us
Right.
were appointed. We
Right.
haven't had a
Good.
full board since like 2016.
I think you're
think,
absolutely
so.
right. I think that we've had vacancy, like, right after that, and
Yeah.
never filled to complete.
So it feels very good to have 2 new members. Thank you for willing to volunteer. And you'll just get sworn in prior to the
Yeah,
next meeting.
Quite honestly, I had no clue, so I
That's our orientation we're talking about.
Welcome, Jean.
That is part of the orientation thing, is how would anybody know that?
right.
Right.
I just went to work like normal today.
Well, also just finding out that you were actually confirmed, if you don't watch the 3 hours.
Right.
I was actually there last night.
Yeah, well,
So
that's
give me
it.
a heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I sent her, what's your free vote, yeah.
I was talking to people who were appointed to the recycling committee, and they were like, I don't know if I was appointed or not.
And it's not very clear if you're not used to the process. Like I had applied in, I think it was like April or May, and the first meeting was in June, and I didn't get my letter until the first week of July, so I missed that very first meeting.
Oh, that's right. Is that like?
Which is why I always forget that I was part of it from the beginning. And then, the letter told me to go and get sworn in, but I didn't know the appointment committee process, the city council process, so hopefully that's part of the orientation, because sometimes I still even have no clue, like when you applied, I wasn't notified, there's no notification for when we get applicants, so.
Yeah, I just happened to be there at the meeting.
Yeah.
It said, like, I applied, and then last month, we didn't know either that either you or you had applied, and I was like, well, I think Jane applied.
You mentioned
But,
that.
yeah.
And I
I had
had
a
the
discussion of it, and
Yeah.
then I was able to get the agenda for the appointment committee meeting, but then I kind of was lost from there, but.
So one of the things that I proposed to Phil Crowell was to have them also go back to the appointment committee process,
Yeah.
which was established long ago when I was a city councilor, and it's never been reviewed.
Okay.
And while I served on that committee and before and after, I felt that the committee should be looking at themselves. But years I served, the majority of the members did not think that was within their purview. I do. So I'm hoping that not only will the city council look at it, but people who've gone through the exercise would go through and say, like, this whole signature and oath needs to be added when you're appointed. There is the process of that you're not going to be notified, but in this tight example, we needed you tonight to conduct a quorum even. So somehow there should be, an improvement in that process as well.
I got an email that my application was received, and that, I believe it also listed the dates of the nomination committee, and then if you were nominated, then it was going to the city council meeting. So I knew those just from that email from Susan.
Sue Clements Phillips.
Yeah. Yeah, you got the same thing, right?
Yeah, and I think she also said that the council would be voting on it last night, and that
Yeah.
it could come, but that I
Yes.
didn't.
We didn't have to.
And it was when I responded and said, I can't come, and she said, well, that's okay, but you'll need to be sworn in at some point. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little bit,
And they told me I
Haphazard.
didn't have to go to the committee or to the appointment committee, and I went, but I guess you don't even have to do that, which to me is also, yeah, it is. It does seem weird. I mean, why have an appointment committee? I know you have to submit an application, but it's very bare bones.
And
I
then
mean-
last night, city council meeting, they just read it through. So the number of people for the ad hoc recycling, the 2 for us, 2 or 3 on planning board, and they just Belinda read through each one, and then they voted on the 12 or whatever as one vote. You know, they, of course, asked if there was if anybody wanted to discuss any of them, and nobody did, so they just all voted us all in as a group to their.
And that has happened unless a counselor, taking just again, practical experience here, has happened, which makes the appointment committee process, to me, significant and powerful. Because unless somebody objects, a counselor objects and takes one of those out, it typically goes that way.
Yeah.
You know, a motion's made and the information's in the agenda packet. But there've been a lot, you know, for me, the biggest thing that the city could do to improve the whole process is to have a standing appointment committee meeting every month, which would be likely to be the second Mondays of the month, because they would do these votes on the third month. But every month, so, because what happens, and you can look back, they don't have a standing day. So now we've got these openings, and conservation really suffered from this. They knew as soon as the close date that we didn't have applicants, so we should have opened back up for the next 30-day cycle. We had to wait until the committee meeting, till no appointments were made, to open it back up, because then they had a date for the appointment committee. So you can, just that one step alone of making it consistent of when the appointment committee, I have to commend the current council on doing more consistent, but more regular. But you can go back, in some cases, you couldn't even decide a date of the appointment committee. So it is a process that needs attention, and everybody who's experienced it in one way or another, I hope when they ask will put in some input. And I would strongly encourage anybody who could possibly go to the appointment committee, if you submit an application, to go and show up. Because there have been times that has made the difference in the appointment.
Yeah, I didn't go, I would have, I was scheduled to
Yeah.
pick up my horse.
Well, they had the meetings at not the most convenient
No.
times either.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
I think I went on 3:30 on
Was it-
Tuesday,
was that-
and
that's what it was,
I work
right.
9 to 5. It's
Yeah.
not exactly
Yeah,
That's the other problem
optimized
with it.
for,
Yeah.
So in
Two-
terms of
two
what the,
questions.
sorry, go for it.
Two questions. It's basically, how are we going to be, you know, I'm 100% sure that whoever is doing the teaching is correct, because as I recall, you saying that as a new counselor, basically the city manager didn't give you all the right information about planning board.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I don't mean to be critical and facetious, but that's a real world experience. And the other thing is that same process going to hold true for all elected officers, including the mayor.
The city has offered in the past formal training to city councilors and the mayor, and that's what when I talk about bringing education here, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about contracting with MMA, who provides these on a regular schedule throughout the state of Maine. Unfortunately, most of them are not convenient to Lewis and Auburn, but a regular schedule. So annually, you could count on the city of Auburn doing one on public meetings, recordings, record keeping, FOA. That's one. You know, another one, and this probably should come first, your duties, responsibilities. I'm going to add liabilities to serving on a city committee, those kinds of things. So I was looking and expecting it to be from MMA or a national organization like that.
I think my biggest problem with us is that we are appointing people that are not city members. Even in our ordinance, you read the ordinance, there's the city resident. I have a big concern about that.
Yeah, that's,
We're appointing people that are not in the city residence to these committees.
I agree with you, and that's a separate topic from this training, that again, that's one that unless a bunch of residents get together to make an issue of it, it's not been addressed by the city council. It was reported out at a workshop, this question came up. The city council took no action because it was in workshop, had no further debate, and yet we got notices that,
City council needs to be paying attention, that's the problem.
Yes, it is, but there again, it only works if you have eyes on you. So my 2 cents would be that a citizen group might want to start reviewing this process and how it would happen, and look at the ordinances that are limited, that, to me, up until that meeting, I assumed that if it's the city of Auburn, that it would be a city of Auburn resident when it says residents on the volunteer page, but I now understand that my assumptions are assumptions.
I thought the appointment committee just appoint anybody that, submits their paperwork.
Yep,
And I have an issue with that. They're not double checking, they're not paying attention. The committee are supposed to be residents of Auburn, and they're not paying attention to that.
Yeah, I think this is good discussion to have, but I want to make sure that we're focused on what the Conservation Commission can do about this.
Right.
So when we had Brianna and John, or you, no, Brianna and you were up for reappointment, I had put together letters of recommendation that you be reappointed.
Yeah.
And that was a way to kind of help bolster you through, potential, which we didn't have, other applicants. So I didn't do that for Jade and Michelle because I was uncertain about new members since, I know we had exposure to them, they had come to some of our meetings and the presentation in April, so I think I could have based it off that. If we have exposure to people who we feel are appropriate for our commission based on previous interactions with them, I think that's a really good way to move forward to make sure that we're getting, qualified applicants and appointees. I'm not sure what not that we have authority, but what our role would be in, making any kind of recommendation about trainings and changing the appointment, process. I'm not really sure where we can go with that, but moving forward, if we do have other applicants, I think writing letters of recommendation that they be appointed is helpful. I mean, if anyone has any other thoughts about.
I agree, based on our limited time in our work, I'm not sure we have the time unless somebody has some strong feelings about this, but individually, or if there was an interest, I know I have an interest in this, but I'm going away for a month, of just talking about this kind of process, like talking about should all Auburn committees only be made up of Auburn residents? How is the process working? What changes could be made? Because there are basics on that, but I think we have so much work in such a limited time that other than reflecting on in the minutes, I hope we include that based on your experience, both about the experienced reappointments and interest in new applicants, that we promote that in our minutes and that when the time comes that we have an opening, so that we are more proactive. The second and most important thing that I think could happen that doesn't happen now, which we could start for ourselves, is what is it that we're looking for and need? You started a narrative, Sam, remember when we were going to recruit?
That's right, yeah, and that was more outreach. It
Right.
didn't really go into qualifications,
Right.
but I think that would be a very worthy discussion for our group to have. What is it that we're actually looking for? What experience do you need?
And that changes based on the makeup of the current group. As an example, we can't have all conservationists as members of this because there are other parts of the business. Just as, I serve on one that you'd think they should all be engineers, but it's also a business and it has nobody at the table except for me who's had any HR administration experience. That's tough to handle, even training questions if you don't have it. So I think that each time we have an opening, we might take a few minutes on that previous agenda and say, okay, what is it that we're looking for? What could we particularly use right now at this table to round out the group? That and succession planning. I'm gonna, when I die, batches are our friends and courtesy doesn't cost money, and the third one's gonna be succession planning will be the death of everybody if you don't do it.
I think another proactive thing we had talked about, and I think you guys were working on, is creating a good summary about the work that we do that can be on our city webpage. So, because right now it just is a link to an ordinance, or you have to sift through a minute. So, is there anything that you've?
I created just kind of a little advertisement type thing that you could post on social media. In terms of what we actually do, in terms of the content of the work, I would want to flesh something out a bit more that goes into detail about the actual deliberations. And I also just think I mean, I don't know how we would implement this in practice, but I think it would be great if we could get potential members to actually attend a meeting before, you know, and come meet the commission as a prerequisite for submitting an application. I don't know what the process would be for implementing something like that, but if you're gonna sit on a commission, it would be well if you know what kind of work they're doing and what you're in for,
You
so.
would hope, though, that an interested candidate would do that. So
Right.
rather than make it an obligation, because then we're talking about all committees and all of that. However, in our proactive state, that could be part of our, and lack of a better term, I'm going to call this the sales pitch. So the work you started, we could create, in effect, a little threefold brochure that would have the information that we could update when the time comes for our next. These are things we are particularly looking for. But do that and invite them. So rather than say you have to, say, if you're interested, the Conservation Commission is an active, vibrant group that is looking for engaged residents. So if you're interested, know you're welcome to come, and here's our meeting schedule.
That's a good way to do it. That's better than board requirements. I like that, good.
Sounds
Good work on that,
As
too.
as you've said all this, it just occurred to me that, you know, anybody could have, just like I did, filled out an application online for any particular committee they wanted, or every single one of them if they wanted
Yeah.
to. In fact, that application would have gone to the nomination committee, and it sounds like they're just funneling them through.
I mean,
guess.
there is
And
a
then-
process theoretically, and you know, I think it depends on who's on that committee and what the position is, you know, so there's.
And that's why I would like to be notified when we have an applicant. Not that I want to prevent or like significantly screen people, because I don't necessarily think that's fair either, especially for volunteer work, but I would like to know when someone's applying and receive a copy of their application so we can review that and choose to make recommendations if we want. So I think that's another thing within our purview that we could request, and we've talked about before. I'm not sure if that's,
I think that's a
to
really
sue?
good idea.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, because you know,
Because
there have
otherwise-
been a couple of meetings where we've talked about how are we gonna recruit new members, and I actually spent the time to craft an advertisement to recruit new members, only to find out that 2 new members were basically already in the pipeline,
Yeah.
which is like, oh,
But now we're going
that's
to use
all
it.
better, we can use it down the road, but just in
Yeah.
terms of
Exactly.
efficiency of.
Where did I read somewhere that you're trying to make this add 2 more members to this group?
so that was gonna be my next point.
Oh, okay.
Wrapping up on
Yeah.
this topic is, do you want the long, I'll give you the long story since you're new.
I read it
Is-
somewhere, I can't remember where.
We were, you know, we're commissioned by ordinance, and we spent a lot of our first year kind of reviewing policies and procedures and our ordinance, and we had submitted a series of proposed ordinance changes in 2016 at some point, and one of those changes was requesting that we have 2 alternate members, so that in the absence of, you know, one of our regular voting members, they can stand in and vote, especially since we have had issues with not having a full board. It was kind of like collected, and there was a batch that was gonna go through proposed ordinance changes, but then city council cycle changed, and it was kind of lost in the mix. So we have some drafts of the proposed ordinance change, and I can request the official one that was submitted, you know, from Sue. I guess she has all that on record. And we want to review that. I think we still want 2 alternate members, but I think we also want to review all the other proposed ordinance changes that we had originally submitted, see if we still agree with that, if there's anything else that we want to, you know, change in our ordinance, and then resubmit. But the 2 alternate members, I'm pretty sure is something that we all still agree on having.
And we did talk about that at the last one, so I won't be here in September, but I would request that we take that one change that we proposed and submit that, review it again to see if it still stands, but since planning board and other committees have alternate members, and it's really vital we do, plus it grows you know, an alternate oftentimes becomes a regular member, there's a procedure in the encouraging that we discussed that at the September meeting. I don't have to be here because everybody knows my opinion on it, and that we bring that one forward with the narrative that we've submitted a more lengthy one, but we're finding the urgency of this one, so that you could discuss it and possibly say reapprove it and then move it forward so that they could have action in October. or November, and that we could get that, but that they know that this work has been done,
Right.
the longer work. And then we can take our times, you get the official one submitted by Keith Preble, we can take that and upgrade.
Rita, are you jumping in?
No, I'm totally, in agreement with him.
Okay.
I'll add that to the agenda
Good.
item to our September meeting.
And I would, if back along, we've talked about adding alternate members. If we want to do that, I would encourage us to consider getting things started as quickly as possible so that it's considered by this council while this council has an opportunity to act on it. Because they're the ones that would be familiar. And because once the new group comes in, if it is a new group, we don't know who it's going to be, basically. There again, they're going to be in the middle budget and all that sort of thing, and we could get held off for a long period of time. So I would encourage you, if this is what the group is supportive of, basically to get that, at least that segment moving as quickly as possible.
So that could be done in the September
Right.
meeting. And Sue Clemens, the leader, could tell you how to, if you all agree that what we agreed upon in 2016 still works, that she can tell you the wordage that would need to come forward on changing the ordinance. It's simple. I mean, we're going to have provided the words, but she'll know how to do, so that we could, if you move it forward in September, it could go to the council as early as the first meeting in October.
I like getting the two alternate member issue resolved as soon as possible, but my fear is okay, well now we're gonna change another thing about the ordinances. I just wonder if there's gonna be issues about why didn't we just do it all at once?
Other than to say a time, I mean, again,
Right.
this has been sitting with city management, not our current one.
And then just express
And
that
just-
this
right.
is a more urgent issue.
Right, and this
we'll
is
take
the,
the time.
and that since the new council's going to be, whatever the new council is, happens in November, it's actually ideal for us to have that for December, for us to move forward, because it will be the exercise they can use to become familiar with all ABCs.
Right.
We could be first.
Just while we're on this subject,
Do we want to do this now, or do we want to wait until the next city council?
She didn't hear our discussion.
I think you just missed that discussion, Rhiannon, but I would just catch up with the video. Sorry, yeah, just so we don't rehash it. Yeah,
So.
yep.
you have more-
Yeah, I was just gonna add, one thing for our new members, I think it would be useful for everybody who's coming onto the commission to get a copy of the ordinance. I mean, it just seems like something, obviously you can go and print it off. I do have the ordinance on
One
me.
thing.
But I just think as a matter of process, it would be really good for every incoming member to get a copy of the ordinance, just so that at the very minimum, people know what is the charter, what is the ordinance, and what is the duty of this commission. And then when we're having a discussion like this, then we can be looking at it from a place of information, so that we can be looking at this
I did
specific
remember it
language.
before I applied, but.
Yeah, I've read through it.
But yeah.
In our ordinance, we are all residents of Auburn. That's in the first two sentences. And within that, I'm not sure as far as the things that are going above and beyond, they're not in the ordinance. We're kind of outstretched a little bit.
I think in terms of getting a copy of the ordinance, hopefully that'll be part of whatever the new orientation process is gonna be. That said, I don't know who's gonna be responsible for the orientation. Will each individual committee be responsible for giving an orientation to their new member, or is city council going to give a standardized orientation?
I mean, the one that Peter talked about?
Right.
That would be more standardized, but we still would have, each committee is going to have to do something
Right.
to welcome them on.
Right, like, I mean, is there like a packet of information, is there,
Right.
an
Yeah,
issue of?
So maybe just
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
doing that on our own prior to whatever city council.
Like that should
And
be on
that
our
could be part
agenda.
of
Right.
our strategic plan for this year,
Yes.
and talk about ways that we can make sure that new members are oriented most effectively, point M of our ordinance is that we'll adopt bylaws to govern the internal affairs of the commission, so.
Which we did we created them in
Yeah.
that's part of the big packet that's been waiting
Yeah.
since 2016, 17, 18, 19.
I mean, it's
Right,
it's-
and you-
That's why I have no
Right, so you
idea
have
what
no
you're talking
idea.
about, honestly.
Right, but
And
they,
so that would be good,
yeah,
you
absolutely,
know.
but they have never been approved. That's, I mean,
Mm.
literally, that's what we spent most of our first
Yeah.
year on.
I mean, it seems
I
to me
don't know
that
where to
part
access
of
that.
She's gonna
my,
get a copy.
part of my responsibility as a new member probably is to go back. I mean, I've read through the charter, but to look back over your minutes, maybe, I mean, I don't know if this is a good idea, but like to reach out to some other member of the committee, the commission, like not during a meeting and just say, bring me up to speed. Like what have been, I mean, because you can read a lot in minutes, but then it's good to have a little bit more information,
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
and I'm
yeah.
completely happy to do that, just,
Yeah.
because I always feel like when I'm new on something, I don't want to like be jumping in all the
Right.
time saying, oh, wait a minute, tell me about that, because
Yeah.
that really slows everything down. But of course, I want to kind of get around it and like, what are the issues you guys have been working on?
And I totally agree with that. I think that would be great. I'd also want to get clarity from city staff about what types of communications can take place outside of the
Right.
context of this meeting, because if you say,
Right,
let's
you're
have a
not
meeting
supposed
with
to have-
Jordan and
yeah.
Rihanna and Jane, then that
Exactly.
becomes 3 members in the same room talking about city
Right, and I
business.
know if you're in the city council, you're not supposed to do that, so that's, yeah.
Any public group is not supposed to, 3 or more is a meeting, a public meeting for any public group. So our agencies, boards and committees, including
So
those not
maybe I just
controlled
need
by
to
the
go back
city.
and read through all of the minutes.
And we
Like-
also have our videos available. One thing I didn't have
You
with
have
me is they're
15
long.
hours.
Although on YouTube you can set the speed to go a little faster, which I
Yeah,
think is something.
that'll be fun.
And I don't know how to bookmark the certain times, but
I think it's very valuable because really our ordinance is only allowing us research, education, recommendations. We don't really have a lot of authority, and that's the problem, actually.
Actually, if you were probably not on the committee then, but one of the videos that everybody should watch is the Conservation Commission guy from Kennebunk Wells. We brought the speaker.
Professor Grumblin.
Professor Grumlin's video is one that every commissioner who wasn't present should watch.
Is that identified
What's the
by
date?
date?
It was a February 2000.
17 or 18, I can narrow it to
Oh
7.
my God, it's so yeah, February 2017. Professor Owen Grumling. So I went to UNE, studied environmental
Is that his
science.
name?
I actually think it's in the
GRU?
GRUM. It's like it's grumbling.
Oh,
With the GRUMBLING. I actually think he might spell it with a B, but it's usually G. He's
Where-
a
where's he
professor. He's a
based?
professor at University of New England. He was my professor in college. He is in the environmental department, but he really kind of has most of his commission experience from way back in the day.
30 years being on a
Yeah.
conservation commission in the Kennebunk Southern area.
Wells, yeah,
Wells,
the Wells Conservation Commission. He's a super great resource. He knows a lot about environmental literature and environmental communication, kind of how to get people on board. He's got this great story about New England cottontails, and all the ladies, loved the bunnies because they were cute, and, they were able to convince people, the hunters and stuff, to conserve the population so they could continue hunting. It was really, he's a great resource, and, we have him as our first guest speaker. I kind of have this goal to do an annual guest speaker a year. We had the Bates presentation on the AGRP this year, and yeah, he kind of gave us a really good background. They established a land bank in the town, so basically they have funds available for projects when they want to, whether it's buying land. For us that would be great because if we could have money in the bank already to remove the dam ahead of time, it's easier than going and asking for like $250,000. So it should be. I don't know if it's on Great Falls TV or YouTube.
I don't know about YouTube because it was done before we were on YouTube, but if you can't find it after looking on the city website, Great Falls TV, contact, send a note, as a courtesy, obviously, copy to Jordan, to Paul Frazier, that tells him, he's the IT director for the city, and tell him what we're looking for. And then if they can find it, I'd like to put it right on our page along with the other speaker. What he talked about though is what is our authority? What is our role? I mean, he did all the things she was talking about with the rabbits and that,
Yeah.
but the administrator in me, I'll tell you that he talked about our role, our
Yeah.
responsibilities,
Yeah,
what
okay.
authority we had, that it's not, you know, like, Rihanna thinks it's bad that we're in an advisory capacity. His comments will tell you that that's a good spot to be in.
Right, because you don't have certain responsibilities you're held to, you kind of have the flexibility to morph into whatever is convenient at the time, and, you know.
Yeah. But it was an excellent presentation.
It would
Well,
be,
you know, research, education, and recommendation.
Yes?
I think,
Workshop.
I was just gonna pipe in that I think it would be great if there was some way with the city to, I mean, I know this would be cumbersome, but if there was a way to compile the resources for different boards and commissions. I mean, I know we all have our own designated pages, but it would be really nice if the videos could be sorted, you know, so you could watch the Conservation Commission videos.
They are on Great Falls TV and
Yeah.
on YouTube.
And they are sort
What
of
do we
great
write?
balls.
You can't watch it, yeah, and I think, yeah, if you could just link into the page, that would be one thing. But I was also gonna say, just to your point about orientations that you were making earlier, Tiz, and bringing in speakers at different times of year, one thing I was thinking of is if you have someone who comes in and is appointed after you already have a training on an issue, that person wouldn't benefit from that training, but there's so much that you can do with video now
Right.
that
Well, I
there's
would
no
hope that-
reason why we
right.
couldn't just get the city to pay for 5 videos
Right.
on key topics.
Yep.
Put them on the city website and mandate that everybody watch them and do that before taking
They
office.
should. But you know, again, we all pay taxes on the city.
Well, part of this would be, if we've heard from the city manager that they have an interest in looking at the ABCs and deciding how they're gonna function, what resources. That would be one way to get that annual education. The second way is if they bring a physical speaker in, like the MMA programs that I've attended, we'll video record those from
Yeah.
now on and make them available. Again, I think that there's a lot of work that could be done in this area from a communications, but I don't believe the city of Auburn has a communication policy, so we might have to start at the beginning. But in the meantime, we can take care of ourselves, you know, and so if you find that video, maybe we need another piece on our page that says orientation materials, and we make sure that that's one of the pieces that are there. Because he really did cover, what is our role, what are our responsibilities, what do we
The origin of conservation
Yeah.
commissions in Maine, their
Yeah.
authorities, and different, we asked for a couple of case studies. So,
Yeah.
you know, I can definitely work on getting that all set up. I think it would be wise to move on to other topics in the agenda, just for time's sake. So the last thing homework completed is that I submitted the annual report to 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019. I submitted them as is. I didn't get any edits over the past 2 months for 2018, 2019, so they're there. That's good. I'm happy about them.
I'd like to say congratulations and thank you, and I think
Thanks. They were
the
really
Conservation Commission is the only one, I think, doing this stuff. I'm gonna be nice for 90 days and then ask for everybody else's.
Yes, I think we just missed the 2016, 2017 because there was a lot of change. You know, I'm not sure. I know.
They had it, so they
Okay.
had, no, the city got that one,
Okay.
yeah,
So I
the city got
submitted
that.
by two then.
Yes, yeah.
So, you know, hopefully moving forward, I can just kind of keep a draft up on the Google Drive. I'll request a computer for our next meeting so I can show you both the Google Drive account. I created it just as a home for all of our documents since we don't have an official Auburn email. We've had some issues on getting everyone access to it, but you know, that's for another time. But those are on the Google Drive, and I had Sue distribute them to City Council. So she said that was all taken care of. For work in progress and subcommittee updates, first up we have Parks and Cemeteries.
And I apologize for not going earlier, I fixed that problem with myself by putting a reminder in. But we were asked at our last meeting to do our reports in writing, and so I have that. If you don't have a copy, you've got extra.
And to submit them a week
The
prior
week
to our
before,
meeting, so
yeah.
I can get them in the
Right.
agenda packet.
So the ideal, but I cover parks and the cemetery work group, and my comments on the logo, which I know we're gonna defer. But there's our report.
Do you have another copy?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
I can send it to them.
And I got the electronic version of this
Yeah.
just prior to our
Right.
meeting, but I can redistribute that to the entire commission as well.
And it would just go in with anything else passed at the table, and supplemental information in our agenda.
And I do have folders for all of our subcommittees, so moving forward in our Google Drive, I'll just save all this to that. Lewiston Auburn Community Forest Board had a meeting in July at the tree nursery. Brianna Golden or I could attend. And then there's no August meeting, so the next meeting will be in September. They meet on the third Thursday of every month. So that puts it at September 19th is the next meeting. And they, because it's a joint board between Lewiston and Auburn, they alternate between Lewiston Public Works and Auburn City Hall. I don't know where they're going to be meeting next because the tree nursery was last month and they don't have one this month. So I will share, agenda whenever I get back. The AGRP, I don't really think we have any updates except for, there is a potential for a joint meeting with planning board sometime this fall for a presentation on the results. I realize I forgot something in the new business. It's very important. Our September 10th meeting for the timber harvest.
Is that confirmed?
Yes,
That-
September
yeah,
10th.
okay.
So I totally forgot to put that in the agenda. I'll send an email again. September 10th, we are meeting here with planning board to review the timber harvest ordinance.
Weed conservation.
Weed conservation and planning board. I think it's just on the city of Auburn, they're being required to update it.
Jordan, I'm sorry. You're breaking up.
Sorry, we have a joint meeting on September 10th with planning board to review the timber harvest ordinance. I'll send a reminder out and I'll resend the email with the ordinance, but.
And it will appear as, on our page because that's a public meeting.
Yep, so review that material, I'll resend it to include you as well. Review that material prior to the meeting so that we're ready to discuss our opinions on that.
What time is
I think it's vitally important that we look at our current farmers, tree ordinance that we put in.
The public woodlot management ordinance or the one that Dave Griswold just submitted in April?
So we need to, if we're gonna compare the state with the city ordinance that we just passed, and I know Dave worked really hard on that, we need to try to somehow pass that along to be part of it.
Okay,
Shouldn't it, so,
Now, how are we gonna evaluate the state versus the city if we don't have the city ordinance?
we do.
don't, we have, only my memory from this, but we have a city ordinance on community forest and timber management, I believe. And when you talk about the Dave Griswold thing, I know I maybe should be doing a better job paying attention to forestry board, but that would be an example of what should come to us as our subcommittee.
This is particularly,
To the shoreline, and I asked him, I've been looking for this for about 4 weeks, trying to find that shoreline ordinance.
I forwarded it like last week or the week before. I'll resend it out, especially now that we have 2 new members, I'll send it out to everyone. But I sent that out a week or 2 ago. But yeah, this is specifically about shoreline zone and resource protection. Shoreline is along like lakes and rivers of certain sizes. There's greater protection to maintain buffers, so that's why this isn't necessarily covered by our existing city woodlot ordinance. And timber harvest.
All I'm saying is if we're gonna reevaluate what the state wants us to do, we need to look at our timberland harvest and then the shoreline.
Right, so I'll send what I have out this week, everything that I have on our existing harvest ordinance for public woodlots and then the shoreline stuff that I was sent.
Yeah.
Do we know when the forestry board meets again? Because it would be,
September 19th.
September, oh, so it's after our meeting, so we need to,
I will
Which is-
contact Rick.
yeah, because I would love to get the perspective of people who really understand forestry on a deeper level than I do. I know
Yeah, one
Dave
is-
is my neighbor, he's out of town, but, I'd love to know what he thinks, for example.
Well, I think we, as the Conservation Commission, should extend an invitation to our subcommittee that says we are meeting on September 10th. Please attend to be available to answer questions
be great.
and make comments where appropriate. It may be limited to the open session only, so to give them a
I
heads up.
agree that we should have the forest board there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that would be one, too, and I apologize, Jordan, I saw the forest ordinance thing, and I've been paying attention. by heading, knowing I do my work towards the end. I didn't realize it was also included shoreline, so I've written a note to myself to bring up at tomorrow's water district meeting this issue, because the issue I know that goes both sides has had to do with timber management out at the shoreline at Lake Auburn, where there was some questionable practices. And I don't even remember the details, other than I know I personally wasn't happy with the outcome. That's all I remember.
There's a lot of questionable practices up at Mount Appetite right now, which I'm involved in. So I would really like the fourth board to be completely on board with what we're doing. As you know, that Mount Appetite is not only a restoration, but we have part of that is in conservation. And not only is that conservation, but we are working toward new trail system, and we need to be all on the same page.
I will extend the invite to them. That being said, you know, the meeting's gonna happen,
Yeah.
even if they're not
Right,
there.
right.
So I'll express the urgency for them to, if they can't attend, to provide their written input. Even just as individual members of the forest board, if they, you know, can't, you know, obviously they can't convene prior to. I definitely think their input is valuable, especially Dave's, given his history as a forester. So I will, you know, redistribute the materials that we should all review prior to the meeting so that we are informed. I'll confirm the timing and location, because I don't think I have that yet. And I will extend the invitation to the forest board, all the forest board.
Thank you.
Make sure they
Can
have
I ask a request? Can you forward that to my Gmail?
Yes.
Obviously, I'm out of work,
Yeah.
probably till Monday. So if you can forward that stuff to my Gmail account, then I'll get it.
Will do.
Can I have a question about that? So,
Yes.
you're gonna be sending the materials that are about the proposed forest ordinance that we're meeting with the planning board.
Yes.
I got that. But if we want some feedback from the forest subgroup, is there a way for us to get that feedback from them before that meeting? If they can't make it, can they generate some kind of?
That's what
So, right, I could if they can't attend, I'll ask them to provide a written statement via email to the auburn.me.conservation@gmail, and then I'll distribute that
Okay,
to
got
the
it.
commissioners.
And that could come before I'm just thinking about time.
Yes, if they do, you know, submit it before the September 10th meeting, I'll make sure everyone gets that. As soon as I get it, I'll forward it along to everyone. I need to have your email, so if you could both just email me at auburn.me.conservation@gmail.com, then I'll just have your addresses right there.
Thank you.
Auburn.me.conservation.
Yep, at gmail.com. That's kind of our official account.
I
One
think I
thing
have emails from you from other stuff.
I think so.
I wanted to add in relation to the joint meeting for next month. I believe I sent this out by email, that it came up at the last planning board meeting, that there are proposals on the table to develop solar farms in the AGRP. And I believe they're going to be interested in getting an opinion from the Conservation Commission on the wisdom of moving forward with solar farms in the AGRP. So, you know, a complicated issue, I think. From a conservation standpoint, you know, solar obviously has benefits in terms of climate change, but also, you know, it means development further out of the city, and there are questions about what infrastructure you need to have in place in order to move the power from the solar farm into the city, and what better alternatives might be there. So I just was thinking that would be something, I don't know, you know, what our timeline would be for discussing that. Maybe it would be something we'd want to talk about now, or
Depends on what their timeline is. You know, I think it's definitely something that falls within our, you know, advocacy, education, and advisory ability. You know, that being said, I don't know what the timeline is, if there's a special meeting, did you say if there was?
well, my understanding was that because we have a joint meeting, they wanted to have it
So the draft
in the
agenda,
upcoming.
well, a draft
upcoming
agenda
session.
for that meeting should be created between the planning board chair and the conservation chair.
Yeah.
So, again, if the materials have to be out, if the meeting's the 10th, you're talking about the week that Labor Day falls in for the required out, which means you've really got next week to draft the agenda in order for the materials to be put together. I hate to burden Jordan with saying, just reach out to planning board chair, but that planning joint meeting, if it's truly a joint meeting, the agenda needs to be prepared.
I'm not sure if it's a specialty meeting or if we're considering, and I guess we would have to decide if we wanna just have our meeting on that night. I don't know if it's just a specialty meeting specifically for that.
I gathered that,
ordinance.
I gathered from just the conversations and the plan and reaching out to us through our email about the September 10th, that it was going to be a joint meeting with the planning board to discuss the timber ordinance. That's what I thought then. So that's a special meeting for
Right.
that purpose. So the agenda would, when the notice of meeting goes out, gives you the special meeting required
Mhm.
for that purpose. But we've still got plenty of, I'm not here for either one. so
If
I-
planning board is open to discussing the solar farming meeting, potentially adding that to the agenda.
Well, I'm going to go all the way back to the agenda, whatever it is, for the September 10th meeting. If it's a joint meeting between planning board and conservation, the agenda should be developed by the chairs of planning board and conservation. Otherwise, you're creating a meeting that, say, thinking on planning board decides to have and just invites us along. I think it's very important we work together, and so this might be on their plan to bring up. We don't know, so rather than waste a lot of
I'll
time
coordinate
tonight.
with Evan this week,
Right.
because I haven't really responded much about this, lately, because I was trying to get everything for this meeting set up. So, I've been in contact with Audrey Knight about this, and I think she's the staff board.
She's
training
part of
board.
the staff, right.
So I haven't really spoken to Evan directly, but I'll, send out a couple emails.
And
to
again,
both of
whether it's
them.
Audrey or, but
Right,
I would just,
to clarify.
right, since the chairs
develop
usually
agenda.
have that, right.
And my inclination would be to say I wouldn't want to get into that discussion until we've seen, more specific information. Certainly it would be worth deliberating on, do we want to make recommendations to the city preemptively before we start, if there's interest in development in the ag resource protection zone regarding solar, do we want to start thinking about that as an agenda item that we talk about just in one of our regular meetings, like what should we recommend as an ordinance? Because that could be a great area for research, I think. What are other municipalities doing on this? How can we ensure that the development of solar happens towards the center of cities, so we don't just use a bunch of land that, where you could actually just put solar panels on the roofs of buildings that
So
are already
who's-
there.
Proposing or wanting to discuss about this?
What's that, sir?
Who's kind of bringing this forward or wants to talk about it? Is it
So
a group of residents?
my understanding is that this has come up with council and has then not come up in the course of the city council meeting, but it's been raised to the attention of city councilors. And then the planning board has discussed this as well, just on a very superficial level, just to know that this kind of discussion is happening. I would
But is it a
hesitate
group
to
of
say that
residents
that's
like
official.
like a.
Developers who
Oh,
are
developers.
interested.
So could
So-
you have could you have basically, just a memo sent out to each of us members to basically give us an idea of where they are in that particular discussion or consideration, because, I think there are a lot more variables in solar than there are in some other things, because, for example, a communications tower, you're only talking about leasing 100 by 100 space, but you're talking acres of land, and basically, what do you want those acres of land to produce? And, there are some lands that are, really minimally productive, I should say. We go in those areas, it can be an asset to both the community and to the landowner because of the source of income. But if it's going to be taking out some highly productive soils or certain locations of things, it's a totally different context. There are a lot more variables because of the space involved.
My initial
And
instinct,
also, what can you use the land for under the, I think there's just an awful lot we don't know if we want sound policy.
and my initial instinct would be, because of the tumultuous situation and uncertainty about where the ordinance is going, that this shouldn't get a yes or a no or recommendation until that ordinance, that's further developed, because it's still very much up in the air. Is there, about this special committee that's being formed, to review potential changes. So I think that needs to be tabled. That being said, if the developers or, you know, whatever organization this is wants to come to Conservation Commission meeting and, you know, discuss it with us, they're more than welcome to do that. But I don't think that we should be taking any kind of like official action on it until the ordinance or the zone is on more steady ground.
No, I agree. We should not take any action.
But I'd be open to, if they want to come.
So
If they
I'm
want to
gonna
come talk to us, sure.
I was going to suggest another agenda item that should be a standing one, and this might be future agenda topics, because what has come out of this is, one is I'm thankful that Sam is paying attention to what's happening in planning, because we each sort of have our own little areas of interest. So to make us aware before it's at the end, we can be proactive. So I'd like to make sure we have a process to continue, or maybe it's as simple as now. But if we had a topic, future agenda items that we just park things on, right now, I don't have any opinion or thoughts because I really know nothing about it. So what is the status of, you know, a solar farm in Auburn? Has it, I'm hearing it's been discussed in at least three different places.
Well, no, I mean, so like, let me clarify. I'm just going on like.
Sanitation recommendation.
I'm sorry?
We need to stay neutral.
Yeah.
We need to continue with our action, research, education, and recommendation.
Yes, but this is a topic.
So,
No action.
No, but the topic
agenda,
of.
that's the
of
purpose
solar-
of the new business thing. You had emailed me, but it was after the agenda went up
Yeah,
already.
that's fine.
So, you know, if people have like specific items that they want us to review prior to the meeting, I would have to have that, you know, prior to the Tuesday before our meeting.
Yeah, and
But I'm
that's-
not
yeah.
suggesting it be a future, an
Right.
agenda on our next meeting. I'm suggesting that there will be topics of discussion, and this is not for even action tonight of adding the agenda item, but there are topics of discussion we've talked about that we don't want to lose track of. So for lack of a better word, I want a parking lot that stays on the agenda as topics to, I don't care what word we use, monitor, see, have discussed. And now, because I know nothing about it, and I know that's been discussed in at least three places.
So let me clarify
And discuss
before,
would just be-
and I don't know,
Right.
I don't want to misrepresent
That's
that,
it's
you
been
know, they're
discussed in
getting
one place.
conversations.
It's been discussed in one place, and obviously solar farms would have an interest to us. So I'm only suggesting, and that happens to be the first topic that we put in the parking lot. But I just don't want us to lose it, and I don't necessarily want to put it on the agenda because we don't have enough of information.
And I also-
To give you a little
yeah.
context, basically, over the past roughly year, I've received several contacts and stuff from companies that were almost fishing, you know, as possible sites. Basically, they were looking for 20 acres or more, 20 acres as a minimum, and or more in a single parcel in a single block. And essentially tossing out figures similar to that being paid to the landowner, similar to a communications tower. You know, it was just plain, but that was basically would, I'm sure that was a mass mailing that went to an awful lot of landowners, but it's something that would be, you know, as a landowner, you normally look into it very seriously. I didn't because I know a little bit more about it, but it obviously would stir a lot of interest until they got into more specifics.
So I think that's really helpful context to have. And the one thing I would say just in relation to all of this is that regardless of the issue, whether it's solar, whether it's, you know, any kind of development, wherever it might be in the city, I think it really will behoove us to be, you know, proactive rather than reactive.
I agree
To
with
see,
Right.
you know, before there's a developer that has a plan and we're the ones that say, hold up, I don't think that's a good idea. Let's see, you know, what are the trends and try to figure out, you know, what are the other municipalities doing so that we know and don't get kind of stuck behind, you know, being the naysayers and the environmentalists who are trying to put the kibosh on development, you know.
Yeah. And that's why I don't want to lose the subject. And this
Yeah.
is just one, and I'm sure if we went back, we'll think of 2 or 3 other things we've talked about,
Yeah.
but they don't need to be on an agenda now, because
Right.
they're not something we have to take action on, but that we need to keep in the back of our minds, so that even if you just had a personal interest, you begin to pay attention to that list. Like, until tonight, I haven't paid attention to solar farm. I know about communication towers, because again, my water work, we have communication towers that we collect rental on, so that piece I'm familiar with. So yeah, that's my suggestion, somehow, maybe it's just listing in the minutes and not on the agenda, but a future agenda category.
I'm
But I guess
guessing,
I'm just confused on what you're asking for, because that would just fall under new business, would it not? If
Not
like,
in, I don't want to talk about it. In other words, we have brought up the subject
well,
of solar.
wouldn't that be maybe more appropriate in the strategic plan? When we do develop a
If
strategic
and when
plan,
we
things
do,
to keep
right.
in the back of our
Right.
mind, that's kind of written, that we could always look back to,
Right.
but if it's not on the agenda, I think maybe, because we want to develop a strategic plan for hopefully, the beginning of 2020, outlining, at least for a year out, what our goals would be, things to keep track of, short-term, long-term
Well,
goals,
that
so
may be
maybe that would
fine
be
this fall.
appropriate.
I just didn't
I was
want
just
this-
confused on
Yeah,
kind of what.
no, if you put it under new business, it's a
Right.
topic we're gonna discuss.
Right.
I don't want to discuss, I don't want to take any time, the I statement, any time at conservation at this time on the subject of solar farms.
Right.
However, since it's been discussed at one or more meetings, and we will have it, we need it on our radar. And since I know nothing about it, if I'm not studying my Civil War stuff, I might look up solar farms.
I was just gonna echo like what you were saying, Jordan. I think it's a really good idea. Put it in, as we develop the strategic plan, start to look at where are some of the key areas of concern and think about how can we make that a regular part of our business to check in about how we're doing on our overall strategic vision.
Which the Forest Board does a great job with. They almost always have a section in their agenda, review the strategic plan, just like very briefly, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Are we doing everything? Are we on track? It's not a long labored discussion, but it's a good reminder. It's in the agenda to check
Right.
the strategic plan, but not necessarily the specifics like you're talking
Right.
about. So I
And
think
if
that's,
you do committee reports like you asked, that's how that one would get.
right. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind moving forward with the strategic plan, which hopefully we can start developing, this fall to get ready.
it's a perfect example of the type of a project that could have unintended consequences.
Right.
And I think that, that there are there are positives and the negatives,
Mhm.
and I think once you dug into it, you'd find there's a potential for that in certain locations, but it would not be wise to have it in other locations.
Right.
That pretty much is, but the thing is, I don't think that discussion or consideration will occur unless it occurs within this group.
And being proactive is certainly a way to get up, ahead of the ball, ahead of the game, so that we're not playing catch up saying, well, what about this? I totally agree. And that just, will help us further avoid unintended consequences by having that in our strategic plan about, maybe let's explore this if we have free time. So, absolutely agree. Thank you. We kind of got off track from the agenda because of the meeting that I didn't
Right.
want to forget about since it wasn't on there. So I think we left off with, there weren't really any updates to the AGRP. So going back to our work in progress subcommittee updates, LA Trails.
I have a question. LA
Yes.
Trails is a organization now in the Twin Cities, correct?
Yes.
Okay, but it is not a city of Auburn. So could we,
like
in
free-
practice, right, either add that, it's LA Trails
Yes.
and non-city as part of our practice of
Right.
documentation, so that when they look at this and they talk about LA Trails, going back to the earlier discussion, the one of 40, well, we members of the city and sometimes city staff provide resources to these. This is one that we really, it isn't ours, so
Right.
it's creating those relationships we talked about, but I'd like to identify LA Trails as a non-city.
Right, because it falls in the work in progress /
Right.
subcommittee updates,
Right.
it's not clear,
But
so
we want to
I
keep
can
them on our
try,
agenda.
right, I can try and clarify what our subcommittees are versus what our liaisons are versus what our
That's right.
interests are.
And the same thing's true with the Mount Appetite group. I believe, listening to Rihanna last month, it's called Friends of Mount Appetite, and I thought there was something in our agenda about that. But again, we should be using the correct name and identifying that as a liaison group, not one of ours. I want them there.
You're right to that.
I'm sorry.
LA Trail.
Yes,
So just to fill you in, so LA Trail, we kind of created our own arm,
yep,
and we're all from city and all of that, we're
Right,
Um,
and we
so
support
we're not
that.
being extended in the city ordinance. And the same with, Mount Appetite, but, like you said, is we are still part of Auburn Recreation. Now, with that being said, Mount Appetite has, part of that woodlot comes under our forestry board, and part of it is under conservation. So part of it is recreation and part of it is conservation.
Right, but that's the land ownership and use, that's not this group. And it was in the minutes, and that's why I want clarification. Friends of Mount Appetite, are they part of the city? Because if they are, then the comments made that the money that they're gathering is being maintained in a separate account under the recreation department.
No, you're correct.
And
For
if,
now.
well, if it is for now, whatever it is, if currently there is a group called Friends of Mount Appetite, which is a group underneath the recreation department, no different than a baseball team, and that they have funding that they're gathering, no different than a baseball team, then all that would get reported through there. And because we keep using the word we, in fact, that was one of the biggest things in the minutes, we need to identify who we are. When it's the Conservation Commission speaking, it's the Conservation Park Subcommittee, or in this case, I believe the title of the group is called Friends of Mount Appetite. But that's the clarification.
You're correct, Tiff. I think the important thing is to remember that we're liaisons because there is a conservation and Indian Auburn woodlot.
Right, and on the land.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't believe that we need such a subcommittee per se. I'm kind of reevaluating that. I don't mind being part of that, but an official liaison subcommittee, we don't really need that.
I thought we, the Conservation Commission, decided both LA Trails would substitute for any work group we were going to create, and we just have a liaison. And that Mount Appetite, I'm sorry?
I'm with you. And I agree.
Okay, and Mount Appetite, whatever it is, now called Friends of Mount Appetite, again, would be a group that we would collaborate with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, because that's where that relationship falls as related to conservation.
I agree, but again, half that woodlot falls under our woodlot.
But that's then why we should be, why the Conservation Commission should be interested.
I know. It's not that easy. Part of it is Parks and Rec, you know, with their woodlot, in the outer woodlot. But part of that Mount Appetite is in a conservation easement. And so what we're struggling with is those two variances.
And when you say we are struggling with, who are the we? This is where we're getting confused. I'm getting confused. When you,
The LA Trail versus the Parks and Recreation Department.
okay,
And I'm kind of on a border because I'm sitting on both and I'm trying to be really neutral, but in all reality, part of Auburn owns that as a recreation in woodlot, and that's part of our woodlot management project. The other part is in conservation, so it's kind of weird. I don't know where my goal is, but I'm trying to play both fences.
well, our conservation easements, we have conservation easements on hundreds of acres in the city of Auburn. So if we, the Conservation Commission, are going to look at conservation easements, what part we, the Conservation Commission have with it, we've got a much bigger task, and that would be another one of those I put in the parking lot for now.
I think I understand what you're saying about there's not as much clarification in terms of like how we're related to certain interests, whether it's work group, is it liaison, is it just something we're keeping tabs on because we're interested? So moving forward when discussing minutes and agenda, I will try and clarify because in my interpretation, if it's not, if parks, you know, if it's not a subcommittee
If
or
it's
work
not our,
group,
we've got two.
right, if it's not a subcommittee or work group,
Yeah.
it's either liaison or just general interest,
Yes.
keeping tabs, and that does need to be clarified in the minutes. I apologize for that.
No, it's just
But
new stuff.
right,
There's no
right.
apology needed.
I think I'm trying to find my role too, and I think that conservation needs to stay in the middle of all of that, or will it evolve?
In the middle of all of
Either
Mount
one,
Appetite?
I don't think so.
Are you talking about that you think the Conservation Commission should stay involved or monitoring what's happening at Mount Appetite?
Conservation should play a role in the Mount Appetite. The way it's unfolding.
But I'm not clear as to, are you talking about the Friends of Mount Appetite organization? Are you talking about Auburn Parks and Recreation?
Now, the Friends of Mount Appetite, I think, should stay with the Parks and Rec department.
Is part of the question here, I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure out what's at issue.
Right, I
And
am
it
too.
seems like there are different kinds of land ownership is part of the issue. right?
Land use.
Like and use. And so how we as a commission relate to like private property or like who owns Mount Appetite or conservation land, I mean.
I think it's just really unclear what all the commissions exist, who's doing what, that kind of thing.
So
Yeah.
do we have something to say about any land in Auburn just because it happens to be in Auburn?
So-
Or do we have more to say about certain kinds of land?
I
Do you see
think,
what I'm asking?
I do see what you're asking, and I think this is a matter of when we need to revisit our ordinance to find out what our charges are. We do have education advisory and,
It's attached to the Auburn Woodlawn. So as far as the forestry, our forestry board, this is the Auburn Woodlawn. But part of it is not only conservation, but it's recreation. So this is a really confusing territory, and I think we should try to keep our foot in there just so we can advocate any part of the process as far as new trails, as new as signage, as new as, trying to get people over there. I think this is a really unique situation. Does it need a subcommittee? I don't think so. I'd like to report out and be part of this process, but it's kind of a very intricate, unique situation.
so to clarify for our new members, we have obviously the Conservation Commission, we can take up our own tasks as, we see fit if we're not being directed. And, we decide on that together. We can establish permanent subcommittees, which kind of operate independently, but they report to us. We have decided that we can establish temporary work groups, which have set time limits that we can choose to renew. Those are a little bit more informal. They still report to us. Or we can just have a liaison. So it's basically one of our members who becomes that dedicated pinpoint person where all information funnels through. So right now, Brianna's kind of acting as a liaison for LA Trails in the Mount Appetite work group. So what we have to decide is if the liaison brings information, where maybe something like this, we have to decide if we want to become involved as the commission or if we want to just keep Brianna on as a liaison and she updates us as necessary. So, I think that's information I'll redistribute. We have kind of agreed upon terms for subcommittee work group. We don't have for liaison, so maybe that's something we can take up, defining the role of liaison. But also, just kind of keep continuing to review our ordinance and see if these things fall within our ordinance and our tasks that we should be doing, or just keep
I'm gonna leave that up to the group to decide. I'm gonna stay kind of on my own here and let the group decide whether they want to make that a subcommittee or not. Now,
I don't think we're talking about
we're talking about education, preservation, and recreation in Woodlawn, which is part of our subcommittee for the fourth ward. That is a fourth lot in Auburn. I'm just saying that. And part of it is gonna be recreation. We're gonna deal with Parks and Recreation, which is a city-owned, entity in its own. I'm kind of caught in this crossfire between that, but I don't mind still being a liaison in between that. But whether you want to be a subcommittee or not, you're gonna have to let me know.
Okay, I think this is a longer discussion than we have tonight. We've already taken action on 2 of these 3 elements you talked about. We already have a standing subcommittee that would deal with the forest part of that, the use of the property for forestry and forest management. That gets referred to our forest committee and comes to us if and when they feel it's necessary. We've already taken action.
The board is not dealing with this yet.
Well, then that's only probably because they've not been asked or not aware. Sort of goes back to our example earlier. But that's where that piece belongs as far as we're concerned. The second piece, the LA Trails group, we decided to terminate our work group because it wasn't necessary, it was duplication and we don't want to build silos. So the liaison relationship with LA Trails was decided, whether you're it or somebody is, but we as a commission said, no more work on Trails work group, it's going away. The third piece, the Parks and Recreation, Mount Appetite comes in as one of our parks, and one of those that we talked about as part of our parks group that has been suspended due to lack of members. But that relationship to that section having to do with either the Parks and Recreation Department or the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board would be a conversation between the two boards or the department coming to us. Because we, the Conservation Commission, have no authority over the Recreation Department.
But I think there's a slightly another component here. Under the advisory concept, essentially, you know, in addition to subcommittees or work groups, which be a direct part of Conservation Commission, and work groups which can be either or whatever. Basically, you know, there are at times we can accomplish more by facilitating other connections, and so basically I think, you know, if there's a worthy need, you know, it can be any one of those, and I think once you get in the easement area, I think, you know, there's no reason that we maybe shouldn't have some interest in it, but maybe the most productive role would be one of facilitating other specifics, but basically we'd be involved in that role and trying to steer it in the right direction and most productive direction.
So one of our requirements has to do with land inventory. I can't remember the land inventory. In that land inventory question, probably needs to be added the elements of conservation easements if we think we're going to have some part of that. Because as I said, there are hundreds of
I can
conservation
read
easements in the city.
that language if you want, if it would be useful. I mean, it's basically just, we're supposed to keep an index of all open areas in the city, and, you know, recommend to the city council or to any board for the better protection, development, or use of such open areas, which may include the acquisition of conservation easements.
Right.
So, yeah.
So our inventory should include the information about easements.
So who keeps, where is that inventory? Is that something?
We don't have one yet. It's never something that we got around to doing.
I mean, it seems like a huge task.
I'm hoping that when we go to address it, it gets on an agenda that we ask the city, because they should have this information, they should have whatever the land narrative is called, in order to know where the easements are, because they have to be maintained, you pay for that, and in order to do that, this is an area I don't know what you do, I know, that swap of land when you're trying to remediate
I think
something.
it's hard to, right now with the trail, especially with the new trails that we're putting in there, I think we're going over boundaries, back and forth.
We who?
I think it's difficult
Sounds like the
to
appetite.
determine whether the
Or is
boundaries
it
are
the LA
lawn
trails?
or recreation. I think it behooves us as a committee to stay involved. Whether we want to be a subcommittee or not, I don't care. I'm going to be involved in this, whether or not, I mean, LA Trail, everything else.
I'm just gonna make a suggestion that we keep the status quo as it is for right now until you can come back, Rihanna, just because the communication is not great, because we're kind of talking over each other, because I don't think you can hear us, and we can't really ask you the follow-up questions that we need. Just quickly on the index point, I think that was a good one. I think a lot of this data is available on the city GIS website, and Rosemary and Moser does amazing work with that, and I think some of that can be obtained through that. It might be good to have her come in and kind of show us.
So that would be part of our, I think, our work plan for the coming year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is to have that. But I would agree that for now, we make sure we use the correct names of the groups and identify them as non-Auburn groups, if they are in fact non-Auburn, and if Mount Appetites, Friends of Mount Appetites are part of the Auburn Recreation Department, which I believe they are based on the notes, then that, it would say that, Auburn Parks and Recreation, Mount Appetite Friends Group.
But it is a Auburn Woodlawn, so I just want to let you know.
I know that.
Right, we're just talking about the nomenclature on the agenda, but I really just want to move on from this
Yeah.
topic,
Yeah,
please.
thank you.
So the updates are listed on the agenda, you can read them there. Moving on to new business, we have nominations for officer roles because we vote in September. That change came about last year, it's in our ordinance, I think that we vote in June. Might not be in the ordinance full review, but we're voting in September for officer roles. Anyone can be nominated. I'm currently the chair, Brianna is currently the vice chair. We don't have a secretary, and we had kind of combined secretary and treasurer because we don't have a budget that's allotted. So there's really nothing for a treasurer to do. I will distribute to our new members, but also to everyone, the tasks and roles associated with each position. For treasurer, I would like people to keep an eye out for grant opportunities, because I think that's, falls in line with money duties. So for nominations, we're looking at chair, vice chair, secretary / treasurer. I'm up for renomination, considering to be renominated for chair or something else. Brianna had said she was open to being renominated as vice chair, but not nominated as chair. Right, Brianna? I don't want to misquote you. She said she was up for renomination as vice chair. And anyone can be nominated for anything, so if anyone has specific nominations they would like to put forth for the roles, I can jot them down so that we can evaluate.
I'd like to suggest either Sam or Jane as they would be wrong.
As what?
Either Sam or Jane as they'd be wrong.
For what? What role?
Well, you're combining it, right?
For secretary treasurer, all of the roles are open. So chair, vice chair, and secretary / treasurer are all open for nominations. So what would you like to nominate them for? Which role?
Well, secretary, treasurer.
Okay.
I would like to nominate Jordan Kate as chair.
I'd second that if we're taking those kind of things tonight, but I think those belong at next meeting when you're actually going to do the actual election of the people.
Oh,
Don't we take the nominations now and then?
yeah,
have
and then
the-
go
Well,
next month.
You can do that too.
Yeah, that's kind of what we had discussed at last month's meeting, to come prepared with nominations, and then we'll vote in September. So, Brianna nominated me as chair.
And I do Rihanna as vice chair. Our new members, I'm declining for secretary
Yeah.
because I did it for half our lengths. And
And I've been doing it the rest of the time, so I'd really
Yes.
love to not
Yeah.
be.
Yes, I know.
I would politely remove myself from consideration for secretary, not because I want to shirk responsibilities, but I am a terrible note taker, so I don't think it's a great, I'm a great skill.
I don't mind doing
Yeah.
that. I think I just need to know what the expectations are for the group, because they're huge. I've been on different kinds of boards where it's like really different how much detail you want.
So because we have the video, we have action-only minutes.
Okay.
Yep, and whoever would be nominated, again, I'll send out the roles, and you can look on the city website for examples of the kind of minutes that I take. Tiz always has edits for them, so I'm by no means
But she
perfect.
does, no, but she does, so she does what I call nice action only. She
Yeah.
doesn't just do the action, so.
Well, because you nagged me about that.
But part of that is you have to be able to, so unless you want to watch a 3-hour video to find an answer, that to me is the judgment call you put in and where she's compromised. If you look at the city council's
Yeah.
minutes as an example, that's where these action-only minutes started. If you look at the history of the city, they start there. They literally are the action only, but they have supporting documentation. So the vote might be 2 lines, but the narrative is a 2-page whereas kind of thing. For me, I think that if residents are going to be engaged, there's no way they're going to do that. The second problem comes when you want to go back and find something.
Right.
So if you want to go back and find out the last time we talked about recycling in the last time in the city of Auburn, talked about recycling beyond the last 60 days, you would have a terrible time.
Basically, I copy and paste the agenda and take like very like scant notes, and I try and like embolden any action. So if you're open to nomination for secretary
I'm
slash
gonna
treasurer,
think about it, but I
Yeah.
wanna look at some examples and just.
so
make
I
sure.
can send those to you and also send you the roles and duties
I mean,
page.
the thing that would be harder for me, like, I mean, like what you were saying about keeping an eye open for grant opportunities. I really get why that would be fabulous. I'm not sure
Right.
that stuff's gonna come over, like, I'm not sure I would know how to do that.
I don't mean actively seek, but if someone brings something forward to you, like the Maine Conservation Corps program, someone had mentioned that. So just kind of keeping track, okay, if someone brings something up in a meeting, like,
Yeah,
hey,
right.
there's this grant opportunity,
Right.
keeping tabs on maybe
Yeah,
that
okay.
grant opportunity,
If
but
we-
not proactively spending your time searching
Okay.
for grants.
And very honestly, I would be interested in that portion if we
I'll
wanted
take
to
notes if
split
you'll
up,
do that.
split up the roles again. I mean, like, I work
It was
with a
never
ton of
approved
different
to combine them,
nonprofit
so-
organizations and,
You might be in a
Bates,
pretty good
yeah.
place to have that kind
So
of
we could
stuff.
split them because they've never been formally put together.
Yeah, so if you want to accept a nomination for treasurer,
Sure.
you as secretary. The only other thing, which I've really fallen behind on, is getting our annual dues in for the Maine Association of Conservation Commissions. It's just writing a budget line item to Jill Eastman, really an email.
Okay.
That's really the only thing
Okay.
we have. on
Trying to
top.
handle that. Yeah, one thing I would mention that, is a benefit of my involvement with Bates is that we have access to a massive database of grants. So that's a nice thing that we can look at and consider that there are
Well, then
resources there.
I'm gonna nominate you as treasurer. Okay, so as standing right now, Jane has been nominated for potential secretary. Sam has been nominated for potential treasurer. I have been nominated as potential chair, and Brianna has been nominated as potential vice chair. Any other new nominations? I don't think I'll need to write down all the secondary nominations.
You got a perfect slide.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So nominations have been handled. We will vote on that at our September meeting, so long as we have a quorum. The logos discussion has been tabled, and I already kind of announced that I'm gonna move forward with stakeholder meetings, brainstorm, start kind of planning for the Littlefield Dam removal. So with that, there's any other new business?
You had one thing, didn't you have, here, maybe I'm missing it. You talked about a strategic plan. Because my question was, what was the difference between a strategic plan and a comprehensive plan?
I don't know, usually just strategic planning is what I've known it as referred to. Comprehensive plan, I think. sounds
Because I
like-
have a comprehensive, I have a book on comprehensive plans for Parks and Recreation, so that's why I asked the question. I was gonna pull it out and I thought, well, no.
I mean, I just kind of have strategic planning as like goal setting
Goal
for
setting, okay.
Yeah.
immediate, long-term future, stuff like that. So it hasn't even been formulated yet, we're not required to make one, so it can be a mishmash of anything.
I didn't do any more beyond that.
Gotcha.
And the other thing I have to, so the Picayune stuff she's telling that I do, and I admit to doing it on minutes, is having worked with the minutes, it's what is written that somebody else will understand 5 years from now.
Yes.
That's my, when you say that's my Picayune stuff,
Yes, and for me, it's like, what can I get rid of before?
But if you've had to go back and look up something, you can't, like these we's in here this time.
Right,
I thought
yeah.
it was most valuable, that information. I can't believe you get the amount of detail she gets, but we just need to clarify the we,
Got it,
because
yeah.
5 years from now.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not perfect at minutes.
Well, I did.
And you're also facilitating the meeting, so it's
Right.
it's
Yeah.
a lot.
And the other thing, if I'm not here, and Jane, I know she doesn't, but if she decides it's more overwhelming, I suggested this in our last meeting. If we continue to have trouble getting minutes done, then I would suggest we do a rotating once a month basis, alphabetically, so that probably puts me first, right? Yep, no, well, you go first. But that we each take our turn, because that is
In the
the,
middle of this, I would like to hear from Jane.
she's,
Oh, I said that,
Why did Jane,
yeah,
why
but-
did Jane want to join and what is Jane's thought?
Oh, she spoke of it earlier, so Jane.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to consider it, I'd just like to have a better sense of exactly what kind of format the minutes should be in, and both Jordan and Tiz have spoken to that.
John, before we adjourn, I've got a brief on it anytime.
What? Before we adjourn, what?
Basically, the way our meeting schedules are set up on regular days, our meeting comes, on most months, it comes after the planning board meeting and after both council meetings.
Yes.
And so, in view of that, I think we need some way to have some notes from actions or major discussions that occur at each of those meetings to have available for us to consider, because once September comes around, there are a lot of things that are in process that are going to move pretty rapidly, or some people are going to attempt to move pretty rapidly. And so I think you know, otherwise we don't have the minutes accessible until 2-3 months afterwards.
They're in their agenda packet. The draft minutes for planning board are in the agenda packet, so.
But in the next month's one.
So the meeting that just have been held before us, that, you're right, it is the month before and it's not a final meeting. How would we, and I see where you're going, how will we achieve that unless we all want to be responsible for watching
Yeah,
another?
you know, I don't know, but it would be really, I would say, a potential secretary or whatever, not be responsible herself, but just, you know, someone that's going to the meeting, have them take some notes and just see that, you know, because we need to know what action was taken, you know.
I see
I
what you're
totally
saying.
agree.
Yeah.
I think we've got right now a 2-month delay because, you know, for example, I don't know exactly what was said about the solar farm stuff. I know it came up briefly, didn't watch it, just heard through the grapevine that, you know, this was discussed. But in order to get those minutes, it'll be at the next meeting that we can actually see that and discuss it. And by that point, we might be further along in the process and we'll just be starting the discussion.
And in some cases, there might be some things that are very important to us that we're going to be completely frozen out of because we don't have the information so we can respond in a timely manner.
So, because I'm still, first of all, I think we're asking an overwhelming task to anybody. So that would be my start, is to ask somebody to plan to see these meetings or go to the meetings, take notes and report back to us.
Especially when we don't know if there's anything pertinent to the
Right.
Conservation Commission.
So separating them, because one's easier than the other in my opinion. So planning board's agenda, city council agenda comes out 2 business days beforehand. And it has all the supporting documentation. The one last night was over 300 pages long. But it all supports the agenda, and they don't chapter it, and they don't do anything to make it helpful. So you have to have the ability to download 300 and something pages first. But hopefully we all have that ability. So you could download the information and look at the agenda. Theirs will be easy, because anything that's not on the agenda, they have not to say they don't do it, but they have a practice of it's supposed to go to workshop first. So we get a 2-week notice at least, because it would have to be on a workshop if it had come up at a meeting today. So that would take care of city council. Planning board, I don't know, because I get their agenda, so again, maybe it's just by habit. When I get the city council agenda, I read the agenda, half the time I download it, sometimes I don't. And then planning board, I get everything, and again,
So just so I understand the process, is if we wanted to understand what the planning board did discuss last week, and without having to watch the full 2.5, 3-hour meeting, are those minutes available? I mean, I can find the agenda.
not 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
right,
so I can find the agenda, I can know what was on their list of things to discuss, but if
Right.
anything came up under the very broad category of miscellaneous new items,
Right.
then, which is, I believe, where it probably came up, then you'd have to go to watch
Well,
that. So-
There must be I have not attended a planning board recently, and I've always gone physically to do that. But if there's gotta be someplace on their agenda that these new items that you're talking about
Yeah.
pop up and we should know, like the solar farm. I don't know how they come up. You know, they can come up in a broader discussion as we've done tonight, but that wouldn't be something they'd take action on any sooner than to put it on an agenda item for their next meeting, which we would know as soon as their members know.
But as far as the council goes, basically, you've got a whole workshop, and basically there's a lot of discussion that goes on there that essentially is not a part of the minutes.
Right,
And you know, that's.
and I agree,
and-
I think that's wrong.
Some of the ongoing projects, or the hot projects, whatever, are really, a lot of the discussion occurs in the workshop. So you really, if we don't have that,
Right.
we
Well,
can't dig
but
in.
we would know the agenda, so we would know the subject coming up in the workshop, because that is on the agenda and is in the packet if they have pre-prepared materials. So if solar, let's pick solar farms because it's easy. If solar farms was going to be an agenda item that the city council was going to address, it would show up in a workshop, it should show up in a workshop first. And included in that agenda packet would be materials that they have. But the discussion is never in minutes, you're absolutely correct. However, if we saw the agenda and solar panels, solar farms were on it, I would think we'd say, oh yeah, we better pay attention to this.
I
It
think-
might be as simple as reading the attachments.
Right, I think we should table this for next
Yeah.
month because it depends on what's the responsibility of each and every one of our
Right,
commissioners. What's who, if we want that to fall to an officer role, like, do we want the chair to review planning board, city council, and everyone else's agendas prior to the meeting? That's a lot to ask. Should it fall, like, where should that responsibility fall? I think it's important, that way we have a heads up if we should attend some of those meetings. And, you know, the chair and vice chair have it as a role. If there's something that's pertinent and urgent, we should go to those meetings. But I think it should be tabled and we need to discuss that in terms of what's the responsibility of every commissioner and then what's the responsibility of certain officer roles when it comes to being aware of other people's business. Because it kind of, we're taking on a lot of other people's business as our business, which takes away from what we're doing directly. And I just don't want that to happen to the point where all we do is keeping track of what everyone else does, because that's very reactionary as opposed to being proactive. So I think we should table it for next month and have a bigger discussion then.
I agree with Jordan.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we can all see how we might find that kind of information.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So with that, I'm gonna call for a motion to adjourn at 8:06.
So
I
moved.
see a second from Tiz and an all in favor. All right. Yes.
Bye, Rhiannon.
Bye.
So auburn.me.conservation@gmail.com.
Yes.
Okay, and can you send out because like for tonight, I was late.
Mhm.
I didn't know how to contact somebody to say, I'm gonna be late for my first, you know.
And
So
actually,
what-
we'll
You
get
could text
yours when
me,
you write to them,
you know.
they'll get on
Okay.
it.
You know,
I mean, I get email right to my phone, so if you just want to email me anytime, I have my phone on me most of the time. I do for work anyway, and I'm a woman, so I always have my phone. So if you just email me at that email, I'll get a notification right on my phone, so I'll see it. And then, I mean, I can share my phone number if needed.
Yeah, I was just saying, if, I don't know if you do that, I don't know if that's part of that, but you know, sending out everybody's contact information.
When you get
Yeah,
our
lines,
thing,
whatever.
when you get your first piece of mail, it lists all of us.
Good night, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Oh, can someone hit off on that, just the red button on the right side? Start, stop.
Oh, right here?
Yes, perfect.